Hello and welcome to Wales, Africa and the World. My name is Peter Gilbey, and in today's episode I'm joined by Wales's Future Generations Commissioner, Derek Walker. Derek is the second ever Future Generations Commissioner, and he started his role in March 2023. Bore da, Derek. Thanks for joining me.
Bore da.
So in a nutshell, what is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and what does the Future Gens Commissioner do?
Well, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, I think, is a really pioneering piece of legislation. And what it does is embed sustainable development in decision-making in Wales. So let me explain that a bit more. So everything we do in Wales, every decision that we take by government, by local authorities, by health boards, by national parks, by our public services, needs to consider the interests of people today, but also making sure that the actions that we take today don't jeopardize the interests of future generations. So how it works is we have 7 well-being goals: a prosperous Wales, a healthier Wales, etc., etc. So this gives us a collective ambition, a direction for the country. These goals are where we're heading and where we're all working to achieve. And we've got 50 measures of success, 50 indicators to tell us whether we're making progress on this journey of a more sustainable country of Wales. And the legislation came about through a national conversation called the Wales We Want conversation. And the people of Wales were involved in that conversation to ask them what they wanted for the future of our country. And that was incorporated into this piece of legislation. So it's viewed very positively around the world and making a big impact here in Wales. My job as Future Generations Commissioner is like a Children's Commissioner or like the Welsh Language Commissioner or the Older Persons Commissioner. I'm independent of government. So I'm there to advise them on how they deliver on this legislation, on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And then I'm there to scrutinise their progress. And I can also undertake investigations where I think there's a particular issue of interest to future generations, where I can understand what's going on through the investigation and make recommendations which they're obliged to respond to. They don't have to deliver on them, but they are obliged to respond to them, and usually they do in a positive way. So it's an important part of our democracy in Wales, actually, that we've got these independent commissioners, because it's not public bodies marking their own homework. Independent commissioners are there to support them to do a good job and call it out when it's not satisfactory.
If you looked at it from a completely ignorant perspective, like you're not really aware of what the Future Gens Commissioner is, what is the purpose of the Act? Like, what is the point of it? I understand, it came about from that national conversation, but what is it actually trying to achieve at the end of the day?
In a nutshell, what it's trying to achieve is to take the right decisions for the long term. So we know governments, politicians have the pressure of short-term media cycles. The next election is just around the corner. We have short-term budgets. What we want to do, and I think what we all agree on, is we need to move beyond this short-term decision-making to taking the right long-term decisions. So we're not unpicking decisions time and time again because we haven't looked at the horizon and understood what the decisions we need to take are now for the long term. So if we were getting this right, and I think we are in many areas, but we've got work to do, we are looking around the world, across the border, and saying, we look long term here in Wales. We spotted that opportunity and we were able to take advantage of that opportunity because we had that long-term horizon. And on the other side, we were also able to avoid challenges, perhaps some of the difficulties that we're facing, because we thought, we saw that coming and we acted quickly. So it was cheaper and easier to resolve that issue before it became such a bigger issue. So that's it in a nutshell. It's about taking the right long-term decisions, both for people here in Wales and making sure our decisions impact positively and don't detriment the well-being of people around the world.
And who in Wales are you scrutinising then?
So there are 55 devolved public bodies that fall under the legislation. So what I mean by public bodies is councils, health boards, fire services, national parks, national organisations such as Natural Resources Wales, Amgueddfa Cymru. So there are 55 devolved public bodies who are obliged to set out plans and show me, but more importantly, show the public how they're delivering for the long-term future of our country and for our children and our grandchildren. But what I found in my time in this role in the last 3 years is there's good support outside the public sector. So even though the law only applies to the public sector, a lot of the third sector or the charitable sector working in the international field and elsewhere are very supportive of this legislation, very involved in developing this legislation, and private sector too. You see organisations like Principality Building Society, they've got a Future Generations Fund to support projects that deliver for the long-term future of Wales. So there's a lot of buy-in for the legislation, and people get, I think, the common sense side of the legislation.
I think that's really interesting how, it doesn't necessarily in legislation terms apply to private sector, the third sector, but, walking the walk does sort of inspire better behaviour elsewhere in society. So the Future Gens Act is just over 10 years old. It coming out coincided with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. How is that related?
So closely related. So 2015 was when the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was agreed in Wales, and 2015 was when the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed by the UN. This was Wales saying, we want to do our bit to deliver on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and our contribution is through the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So we have 7 goals, they have 17 goals. We had the Wales We Want conversation. The UN had the World We Want conversation. I think Wales is the only country in the world to have legislated effectively for the SDGs through the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So this was Wales playing its part in delivering on a global agenda. And the SDGs take us to 2030. And we will consider the future of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in the same timescale. So the new Welsh Government has already committed to understanding how we can strengthen the legislation and align it to any changes in the SDGs that come about in 2030. So at the very early stages of that. But this is important part of all of this, because this is about global responsibility, one of the goals of this legislation, and it's about Wales saying this is what we will do as part of this worldwide agenda.
So as we approach 2030 then, I suppose a lot of attention will turn to how we're doing in achieving those goals in the Future Gens Act and in the SDGs. Last year you published a report looking at progress made or lack of in the last 10 years. The report says, and I quote, "Change will happen by crisis or by choice." Are we 10 years on? Are we choosing change, or are we still waiting for crises to force us to act?
Bit of both. It's a mixed picture, and that's what the report says. It points to some big changes that we've taken place over the last 11 years now in Wales, and you can point to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act as being influential and affecting those decisions. So some really positive things. We've had some of the biggest fall in carbon emissions, in greenhouse gases in Wales compared to the rest of the UK. We are second in the world in terms of our recycling rates. We've seen changes to our curriculum that have been guided by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We've seen big road projects that would have caused more pollution and more debts stopped because of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So if you look at some of the indicators and some of the decisions, let's give credit to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act for that.
What's the biggest standout for you then that you would give credit to?
Well, all of those things and more. I can list those as being, big successes. A big shift in our transport policy. I mentioned the road, but we've seen a much bigger investment in sustainable transport and active travel over the last 11 years than we were seeing previously. Clearly, our transport system is not where we all want it to be, but you can see investment in new trains and more active travel, walking and cycling routes. Many of that, a lot of that justified and linked to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So, I could go on, and what I've given is the Wales-wide examples. I go right across the country, and I was with a group in Treherbert recently, Welcome to Our Woods, and they said, we set up because of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. That's all about supporting and protecting woodland in that area, but also supporting access for people in that area to go into the woodlands. So, very aligned to sort of supporting nature and addressing climate change and so forth. So, it's big and small examples by local authorities, community groups, and Welsh Government that, you see right across the country, and I've done the work. So, please believe me, because you do hear this all the time. There's a lot of support out there and buy-in, but there is much more that we should be doing. And I just mentioned nature. If you look at nature in Wales, and many people are surprised by this, we are one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet. 1 in 5 species in Wales are at risk of extinction. That is a frightening statistic, and people don't recognize that because they think, we're a country that supports our nature, that loves our nature, but actually it's not in a great state. And, and our rivers, we know, are in poor quality. So there are many areas, poverty levels are far too high. They're awfully high for children and young people, and for all of us. These are not in the right place for the long term. We've got to turn around these trends, and we've got to leave our planet in a better place and our nature in a better place for our children and our grandchildren. So, lots of positive things, but much more work to do in other areas too.
I think that's really interesting and a really sobering realization, talking about how nature depleted Wales is, because it's not the image that we that we project of Wales. A lot more people locally are aware of the impact we have on the environment, and are aware of Wales's industrial history and the damage it had. Like, I remember growing up near Port Talbot, the mountains around Port Talbot would be constantly scarred from the heavy industry. People didn't like it, but I think we've seen this year such extreme weather in our summer, especially the impact of global forces on us here in Wales. I think brings into focus global responsibility, which is the 7th well-being goal. There doesn't seem to be as much on global responsibility progress in the report as some of the other goals. What's your assessment of how we're doing in terms of global responsibility?
No, we could definitely be doing better. So when myself and the team look at how public bodies, that's our job, are responding to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, you can see the globally responsible Wales goal as being the one that perhaps gets less attention than some of the others, in terms of the objectives and the plans that they set. And the whole intention of the legislation is they should see things in the whole. They shouldn't just pick one, prosperous Wales or economy. They should think about their role and how they can have an impact on all of the goals. So it's definitely given less attention than some of the other goals by our public sector organisations. And I think part of my job, I've seen as my job, is to work with them to understand how they can make more impact and how they can do more, and why this is important for us in Wales. So we have to keep making the argument about why global responsibility is, right for people today in Wales and future generations, but for generations around the world. We have to keep making those arguments, but we also have to understand the practical actions that they can take. So one of the calls that I made in the report that you referenced last year was for our public sector organisations to become deforestation free. So this means not buying products that lead to cutting down of the rainforests, which are so important for all of our health and well-being for generations to come. And, that is a practical issue. They could stop buying these products and using them in school meals and so forth. Soy and other products that are coming from places where rainforests are being cut down. And I, really pleased to see, big commitments from our public bodies to do that. We've only just, I think, a few weeks ago, seen another council agree to deliver on that commitment, Caerphilly Council. So I think translating that goal into practical action and reasons, and explaining the reasons why it's important for our public bodies to see this goal as, as an important one for them to look at is part of my job, and that's what we sought to do in the report last year.
I think that's really useful as well, because once you have that sort of example of what has been done, so in terms of being a deforestation-free council, for example, you can apply that logic to other parts of your work or society. You can think about what other aspects of our activities or our procurement is contributing to these things that are harming the world more generally, or harming communities on the other side of the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I think it's, when you start to do something and you can see the impact and you can see it can be done practically, it inspires other action. What I wanted to say, though, as well, is, I was learning from the young people of Wales in making that recommendation. It's school children in Monmouthshire that did this work with their teachers to understand supply chains and to look at what they were eating in their school meals. They work with a brilliant charity called Size of Wales, who you'll know, and it was through that they thought, well, actually, we can do something about this. We can take this out of our supply chains and not be buying products that are damaging the rainforests, and we can still have healthy, good quality food on our table at lunchtime in schools. So, that was that wasn't from my office. I don't want to take credit for that. That was from the young people of Wales who spotted a way in which they could take action that was globally responsible. And then that is spreading right across the country, which is amazing.
I think that's really a key point, isn't it? People, especially young people, recognizing that they have power. They're not just like in the wind, being blown whichever way the world decides. They can take action and make meaningful change. And you're right, that school in Monmouthshire that Size of Wales worked with, super inspiring. I was at a Size of Wales anniversary event a few weeks ago where the teacher spoke at that, and it was one of the highlights of the night. It was so inspiring. So I think if people aren't aware of it, it's all on the Size of Wales website, and it's a really inspiring read. The best part of it is it's a replicatable story. Yes. Easily replicatable.
I was there too. It was I agree with you. It was one of the highlights of the evening, and what I took away from it as well, with the teacher that had done a lot of the work, she was retiring, wasn't she, in a year or two? And so she's built it into how this school operates, so it will pass on to the teachers that follow her and the young people that come through the school in future. So it was super inspiring. And I do think, it can feel overwhelming for all of us, can't it? The state of the world, in these heat waves and the low levels of water in our rivers when we're recording this, people can feel overwhelmed by the pressures of the world, and climate anxiety is real, and perhaps young people feel it more than the rest of us. So if we can identify practical things that we can do about it, it can make a difference. But it can also make us feel that we can do something and empower people to take action.
That sort of empowerment and taking action, I think a really key part of that, certainly from Hub Cymru Africa's and our sector's perspective, is embedding that sense of global solidarity with people you have never met and will never meet. Our modern way of working, sort of good global solidarity, is, as opposed to how it used to be in the past, is sort of rooted in partnership, respect, a recognition that there's learning and growth and benefits to be had in both directions, rather than like a sort of a paternalistic white saviour sort of relationship. Is it right the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was inspired by native philosophy?
Absolutely. And I should have mentioned that because it was partly inspired by Iroquois indigenous people in North America, Maori people in other parts of the world. There's something called the seventh generation principle, which is guided indigenous groups around the world. And this is about thinking when they take action, they're thinking 7 generations in the future. How will what we're doing today impact on 7th generations in the future? And it's also looking back to 7 generations before to understand how things were then and understand any learnings from that and changes that have happened since then. So that sort of long-term thinking that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is embedding in Wales, we're just drawing on indigenous knowledge from around the world. We're standing on their shoulders. And also from, European, ways of thinking. When people were building the cathedrals in Europe centuries ago, they knew they started those cathedrals. They wouldn't be around when those cathedrals would be finished. This is called cathedral thinking by some. So, all around the world, we were much better at thinking long term and thinking about our impact on our children and our grandchildren than we are now. And so, what we're trying to do here is bring some of that back, because we know, that's not just the right thing to do, but it makes sense for us. It's the right thing to do for future generations, but it makes sense for us today.
The way the Future Generations Act encourages people in Wales to learn from people elsewhere and learn from history as well, and paying mind to the future. You have a program in Future Gens called the International Learning Exchanges Program. Can you talk a bit about what that is?
Yeah, happy to. So this is a program that is funded separately by Welsh Government, and Welsh Government's international program references the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and is a part of delivering on a globally responsible Wales. And so we deliver a part of that program, and I couldn't agree more with you. The best bits of the program that we deliver are those two-way exchanges, so that we are sharing our learning and we are learning from others around the world. The organisation that I worked for previous to this in the charitable sector was set up learning from what was going on in the Basque Country to support the economy of the Basque Country back then, and we took that learning and brought it to Wales. And so the types of things that we run through that programme is supporting public bodies to learn about climate action and nature recovery. So public body representatives from Natural Resources Wales and Swansea Council went over to Vienna, and they saw how they were greening their buildings, using plants on the outside of their buildings to support nature, but also to cool down those buildings. I think something like they were keeping those buildings cooler by about 5 degrees just through nature, just through practical support to nature. And that learning has come across and is inspiring what they're doing in Swansea. They're leading the way in Swansea with some of their biophilic buildings, I think that's what they call them, where they have plants on the outside, help with the cooling and help with nature in the city centre. So that's what we run through the programme, is to facilitate two-way exchanges of knowledge for our public sector institutions, so that we make more progress in Wales for what we want to do, but also in the spirit of global solidarity. We don't just learn from others, we share our learning too.
What sort of people take part in those exchanges?
All sorts. Often they will be, public servants, civil servants working in a local authority, or in a national organisation, like I say, Natural Resources Wales or Amgueddfa Cymru, or one of those organisations. They could be at a senior level, it could be at a more junior level. It just depends on the value. Who's going to get the learning to share and who's got the most value from taking part in the visit. So they're very sort of practical visits that lead to results, and that's why we get behind them in my team and deliver them.
Something else that your office does is the Future Generations Leadership Academy.
Yeah, one of the best things we do. Brilliant. It's great.
I was going to say it's reported some great success. I was reading about its outputs and its outcomes, and it was really inspiring and heartening as well. For people who aren't familiar with it, can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so it's a leadership program for 18 to 30-year-olds in Wales, and we've just finished the recruitment for the next cohort, which will start in September, which I think is our 6th program. And effectively, what you're doing is you're supporting these young people, around about 30 to 35 each year, with a training program, a leadership program that's built around the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So how in their positions can they be taking decisions or supporting decision making that is right for the long-term future of the country, and how can they do it in a way that's aligned to I haven't talked about these, but the sort of 5 ways of working in the legislation, which is things like long-term prevention, involving people in the decisions that they take. They're supported through a program. They get some great speakers. They go on some visits to our public sector institutions. They have a bit of an international element to them, and that helps them on their leadership journey. And already, they're going into board positions in our public sector, senior roles in our public sector with this grounding. So it gives me hope for the future that our future decision makers are going to be thinking about sustainable development, acting in a globally responsible way. So it's a super exciting program. They come from all parts of Wales. It's a very diverse group of young people usually, and we have open places, and we have places that are already sponsored. So an organisation might say, well, we've got a young person to put on the program. We're going to fund a place for them. And another organisation, I mentioned Principality earlier on, they have been funding 4 places a year. So they might take 1 or 2 of those places. And then there's 2 open places that we advertise for those who are young people who are perhaps not lucky enough to have their employer sponsor them. And they come from the private sector, the public sector, the third sector. And one final say, you can see I'm passionate about this, can't you? But one of the final things I'll say about it is, probably the best learning is between themselves. I'm 53, so I've got pretty good networks now because I've been, in the workplace for a long time, and I know a lot of people, fortunately, and that's helpful to have those connections. When you're starting in your career, it's difficult to start to build those up. So they have, they've got connections with each other now. They learn from each other's experiences, and after they've been through the program, they stay connected. So we've got an alumni group of over 150 now, I think. So it's a wonderful, wonderful scheme started by my predecessor, and I put it on an annual basis, and we've strengthened it year on year, and it's encouraged colleges like Byd-eang College to run their own similar scheme. So it's wonderful.
That's really exciting to hear about Byd-eang, actually, because I suppose you want it to be a success, but you don't want to have to manage it all yourself. You don't want every 18 to 30-year-old in Wales to go through your specific academy.
Exactly, because we're only supporting 30 people a year, and that's not going to make the change that we need. So if we can share our materials with others, Byd-eang College have got ambitions to take it bigger and broader across Wales, and all power to them. We're right behind them. We're working with them, and hope others will do the same.
And so how would people get involved? How would a young person apply to join? And how could new partners do what Byd-eang College is doing? What can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they should just reach out to myself and the team. We support them in any way we can to get something off the ground. We have materials and a program structure that they might learn from. I'm sure Byd-eang College would be happy to support people as well, or organisations. So if people want to get a scheme off the ground, we'd be delighted, because I'd want one of these schemes in every part of Wales. And if young people want to get involved in the program, keep an eye on our social media and our website. We've just closed and recruited the program for next year. So it's around about the sort of April, May time, April, May, June, that we go out to advert for participants for the program, for our open places that are not already allocated by organisations sponsoring a place, and people can apply directly. It's very popular, a lot of demand, but I would welcome more applications too.
And you said there's about 150 in the alumni network. Do you think there's a future First Minister in there somewhere?
Every year we say that, and about more than one of the people on the programme were like, we've got a future First Minister in this group. Well, let's hope they're a future First Minister, because they're amazing. Probably every one of them could be a future First Minister. But, it gives you a lot of hope for the future, gives me a lot of hope for the future. These are incredible, passionate, bright, action-focused young people, already making a big difference where they work. They do practical projects through the program, so it's not just the learning. They have to deliver a practical project. And I go to the graduation every year, and I see them during the course of the year as well. And I think, they're just going to present something theoretical, i.e., this is what I would do. And they've already not just got a plan, they've delivered on that plan, and they're seeing the outcomes. It's amazing.
That's really encouraging, and I think in a lot of these sorts of topics or philosophies, it can feel quite abstract. So making sure that there is tangible outcomes and from these programs is really useful to build that body of evidence. That sounds really encouraging, and I'll put a link to all this information.
Please do,
in the blurb of the episode. If we look towards the future, then, and particularly towards 2030. Obviously, it's a deadline for the SDGs and for the Future Gens Act, but it's also a time when they'll be renewed and sort of maybe reprioritised or added to. Do you think the SDGs specifically could change? Should they change? What could be added to them, do you think?
Yeah, well, I watch from afar, really. I'm sure we'll contribute. So I don't have the inside track on this, but what we're waiting for at the moment is the appointment of a new Secretary General for the UN. And then when we know who she is, hopefully it will be a she this time, then we will understand the timeline and what their sense of priority is for this process. But the world has changed since 2015. The climate crisis has become much starker and clearer. The nature crisis, poverty levels, global instability seems to have got worse. So the SDGs will need to reflect some of that. We've also got to find ways of getting better at implementation. The last time I looked, 18% were on track to be delivered of the SDGs. 18%, that's not shocking. It's not good enough.
No.
Exactly. So, we can't just have this great, global collaborative agenda called the SDGs. That's got to be delivering. So we're way behind. So we've got to find a better way of delivering on it. And I think we've got a few lessons, humbly, to share from Wales, because there's quite a campaign to include culture in the SDGs, measures and goals around culture. Well, we've always had that in Wales. That's been one of the 4 dimensions of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act: economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being are at the heart of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Clearly, that's part of, people's well-being, and clearly we need to support, culture for the long-term, for future generations, for the sustainability of our planet. And so, I think there's a possibility that culture will become, more prominent in the new SDGs. So let's see. Exciting time. We'll also need a new time horizon, won't we? 2100 is talked about perhaps as the next time horizon, I think.
Yeah.
So things, I hope, will change and improve and strengthen, and we'll need to reflect that, I think, in Wales too.
You mentioned it earlier as well, you're going through a period of reviewing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act ahead of 2030. We have a new government here in Wales. How is that process unfolding? Do you have a sense of what's on the cards yet?
Well, we're in conversation with the Welsh Government about how this is going to work. It's early days, they've only been in place a few weeks, haven't they? But we've already met with them to talk about how this is going to work. And I know behind the scenes, they're doing some thinking. They've committed to doing this with my office. So we're working in partnership with them on that. And so more will be revealed in due course. I guess we're too early a stage to set out the plan for it. But what I hope and what I will be asking for is that we once again involve the people of Wales in this conversation about the future we want for our country, because that's been so important for putting down firm foundations the last time around. And that's over 10 years old now. So it might not be the same type of thing that we did last time. It probably won't be. Will need to be different and involve even more people. But we certainly should start from a foundation of not just assuming we know and have all the ideas for the future of Wales. We need to, speak to people right across the country of all backgrounds and get their views too.
And so, you talked about what your hope was for that process. I was wondering if we could maybe finish on some personal reflections. At the moment, what does give you hope?
Well, lots of things give me hope, actually. I guess I'm a positive person. I guess that we've talked a lot. The young people that I meet give me a lot of hope for our future. When I look at the commitment to this, despite what you hear in the media, I see broad support within our public sector organisations and beyond, and in the public, to take action on the climate emergency, to address our nature emergency, to deal with our long-term health trends. People recognise that we can't just focus on the now, and we've got to focus on tomorrow. So that gives me a lot of hope. I think we've got a broad coalition of people and organisations that want to take the right decisions for the long term. And I guess the other thing that gives me hope is we have many of the solutions. It's about implementing them. It's not about scratching our heads to find the solutions. We know what we need to do, and we see it happening in many parts of Wales and across the world. We've just got to do more of that, so we turn things around for the better. So, we're in a good place in the sense, strong support, know what we need to do, and many people, including young people, who are getting on and delivering it. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Something that's quite common with a lot of our partners is like futures thinking and imagining a good future and how do we get there, rather than imagining a dystopian future and how to avoid it. Say it's 2050 and a young person is looking back at 2026, at the decisions we're taking now and the actions we're taking or not taking. What do you hope they'll say that we got right?
What I hope they'll say to you and to me and to people listening is, diolch yn fawr, thank you, because you recognised the decisions that needed to be taken in 2026 that were going to make sure that I had a happy, healthy life. And so when they look back, they think, oh well, back in the 20s, they took decisions that would finally clean up our rivers for the long term, that turned around this crisis that we have in nature. So nature is restored by 2050. We've got the clean air, the climate is stabilised. Also that we have, jobs right here in Wales, in all parts of Wales, so that they can live in, where they were born and brought up. They don't have to move to other parts of the world or the other parts of the UK to get an income and to raise a family. They can do that where they want to do so, in Wales. So, in general terms, what I'm hoping is that they recognise that we've taken it's not about recognition, but they know that the decisions have been taken that enable them to have the happy, healthy lives that we want for our children and our grandchildren. And, when I'm long gone, that they've got that productive, safe, healthy environment to enjoy their lives and to leave it in a good place for their grandchildren.
Derek, diolch fawr iawn.
Thank you very much.
And that's it from Wales, Africa and the world. Thank you to Derek for joining me. Thank you very much for listening.